I'm really, really excited to have Vivek, who is a good friend of mine and who is the founder of Pagdi, to to have on this seminar. Um, Vivek is a brilliant coder, and he has been working on Pagdi for a while. He loves remote work, and I think we got connected around our shared interest of remote work, and we've known each other for about a year now. So, Vivek, I would really appreciate if you can give a quick intro of yourself to our audience.
Yeah, so much for having me, Nitish. It's been great having you in the conversation and chatting with you about remote work and why we're so passionate about it. And everybody's just sort of thrown into the situation where everybody's working remotely now. So, um, although it's a tragedy, it's I hope there's some great bits that we can take away from this in terms of remote work and how we can improve how we work. But yeah, just describing a little bit about myself. I'm Vivek. I'm a co-founder of Pragly, which is a virtual office for remote teams. And a little bit of background about myself. I grew up in a smaller agricultural city called Bakersfield, and then went up to Stanford for computer science. And yeah, I did that for 4 years. And then my final year, I built a company called Stacksquare, actually, and raised a couple $1 million for it from venture financing, and operated for a couple of years and sold it off. And basically, the company that acquired us to work remotely, because they were down in San Jose and we were up in San Francisco. And it's a 2 hour, well, in the worst traffic, 2 hours one way to get there. So it's, anywhere from 3 to 4 hours round trip. So pretty miserable commute. So they allowed us to work remotely. And it was fantastic. That was the first time I'd ever worked remotely. So I kind of came in with a preconceived notion about what it was. People who were working remotely didn't want to, work hard enough, all these preconceived notions, and then tried it out, realized how awesome it is, and that remote workers often work a lot more than their peers inside of the office, and they have all this flexibility in how they can manage their day. But it's not without problems, which everybody is experiencing right now. And the two chief problems being, one, how do you combat loneliness inside of these environments, and how do you feel closer as a team as a result of that? And then two is, how do you just frictionlessly communicate with them? We have the sort of primitives available of text chat and video chat, right? Zoom is fantastic. It's a great utility. The audio and video quality is great. Slack just works in sending messages, right? But it didn't feel sufficient. It didn't feel like you were present enough inside of the product to actually feel present with your team. Some of the mechanics of being inside of an office were just not there, right? Like inside of an office, I can pick up my laptop, go over to your desk and say, hey, do you have a second to chat? Or you also see the sort of serendipitous conversations that are happening around you at quote unquote, the water cooler. You see people chatting about, some cricket game or, latest NBA game in the cafeteria, and you want to go join them. So a lot of those mechanics just weren't there. So that's what led us to build Pragly. And first, for the people who don't know about it, it's kind of a combination between Slack and Zoom, but what we consider ourselves is sort of replacing internal Zoom use cases. So, and the main idea behind Pragly is that in the same way that Slack has text channels, we have this idea of audio channels, where every channel is its own distinct video conference. And what that allows is that you can see all the conversations that are happening throughout the office. And that gives you this sort of quote unquote spatial awareness about what's happening inside of your team. So you can see people chatting inside of the stand-up channel. That means you're probably late to your stand-up. if they're inside of the water cooler, that's, a few people are probably on a break, and you can probably go and join them and banter about non-work stuff. And we see all sorts of different use cases coming up, like, people creating war rooms and different use cases of conversations, even having like virtual happy hours. So basically the idea behind Pragly is to create these serendipitous conversations that typically happened instead of an office setting in a virtual format that makes a lot more sense. And then in a way to make it more quirky and interactive is that when you join Pragly, you create these little avatars of yourselves. And
I love those.
Yeah, a lot of people do
Yeah,
like them. And it's a way to give yourself an identity inside of the office without invading your privacy. And that's one thing too. And when Doug and I were creating privately is when we started off, we're like, hey, like how do we create the office, right? Like on the nose of it, you probably think, okay, always on video, right? That's essentially what's happening inside of an office. And then we tried it out and realized that everybody hated it. Nobody wants to
yep,
be on video all the time.
yep,
So how can we preserve that privacy that people want in a way that they can still show their identity?
yep.
Well, creating these configurable avatars in a way that was fun for people really resonated with them. And on top of that, we provide a lot of different integrations with different tools like Google Calendar and Slack and even things like Spotify, so you can show that your head's down working on something and just convey to your team a little bit more information that doesn't invade your privacy, but gives them enough spatial awareness and context about what's going on. So anyway, long story short, that's what Pragly is, and that's what we're building, and that's a little bit about myself.
Thank you for this. This is awesome. So I mean, I use Pagni myself, and I really love it. The kind of like very human feedback given by avatars, by those celebrations of confetti celebrations, those things are really cool and very well integrated deep into the product. So really great work there. Cheers to you and Doug. So
Thank you.
I'm very curious about something. So you're a very small team at Pagni, right? But you guys have shipped a lot, like a lot. So how's your outlook towards productivity? Like how do you keep
Mhm.
yourself productive enough to execute so much?
Right. Yeah. So that's a great question. I addressing the reasoning behind why it's just me and Doug is that when we started off with Pragly, we really wanted to keep it as small as possible because we don't, because originally we wanted to be a bootstrap business. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We just wanted to make sure that we were building a solid, sustainable business. Um, that wasn't gonna necessarily be, going to the moon or bust. Um, so with that, we basically had to constrain ourselves and just say, hey, this is the number of people that we're going to have, and we're not going to exceed that. And because we were also working remotely, we had a lot more flexibility in how we managed our day. Of course, there's a bunch of people who are, aren't as productive working remotely, but personally, how I find myself working productively is just making sure that I, set aside clear work-life boundaries. That's been really important for me because it's really easy to get wrapped up as a remote worker
Yep.
by, working way past, 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. And, if many people, especially thrown into this situation, don't have distinct areas where they're working and then living out their personal life. And I think over the long run, that can really take a toll in terms of burnout. So
Yeah.
I think that's one of the sort of small keys that I try to enforce with myself is how do I make these psychological barriers a little bit clearer. So I'm still not perfect at it, but I think that's played a big role in maintaining the productivity that I've had.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I mean, me and my wife, we have hacks, so we do our dinner together. So it is a sort of like a virtual timer for us, like okay, you need to shut up. I mean, you need to shut down because it's like 8 p.m. So that's awesome. So given, I mean, from hiring, I mean, like this, uh, I have a question for you. So how will organizations hire and onboard talent while being remote? I mean, what are some of the challenges that you have seen with other companies, and how do you see
Right.
that evolving?
For sure. Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think any person who's been hiring inside of a remote environment has felt the sort of pain
Mhm.
of hiring people across different geographic areas. So, and that doesn't even mean country to country. I mean, I'm in the US and just hiring from California to Alabama to Arkansas, you have to navigate all the sort of bureaucracy that's
Yeah,
associated with the United States. It's a nightmare. It really, really sucks. And then on top of that, there's easy ways to circumvent it, right? Like you can hire people as
yeah,
contractors and they're fine with that. But then all of a sudden, a couple of years comes by and then, some IRS or
yeah,
government agency comes knocking and says, hey, these people shouldn't have actually been classified as
yeah,
contractors. You should have been properly classifying them as employees. And as employees, they're required to have a certain set of paid time off. They're supposed to have X, Y, and Z.
Yep.
And, you know, that and magnify that with the problem of dealing with different countries that have these same laws, and then also working through internationalization problems and also currency problems. It's just, there's so many problems right now in the space of like, how do I hire this one person in this different country? So I think it's just as a startup founder, I look at this problem space and I think, wow, there's so many problems to be solved. So I think long story short is that there's a bunch of players working in this market. You probably know Yob from remote.com.
Yep.
He's working on exactly this process and problem. It's like somebody from anywhere, and he's building out the infrastructure from scratch. He recently raised a sizable seed round. I think it was like a $10 million seed round.
11 million.
I was like,
11
wow.
million seed round. Yeah, 11 million.
Yeah, 11 million. Yeah, sorry. And because it's such a hard problem. You have to build the sort of infrastructure and operational infrastructure in place in every country, and make sure the pipeline for dealing with that. So I think the biggest problems in remote work, in addition to sort of just the sort of culture building and communication problems, are this sort of organizational and bureaucracy management problems. The stuff, the paperwork that you don't want to deal with, that prevents you from hiring, the best talent anywhere, because the default is to just hire from, the same geo that you're at, which dramatically reduces your selection, and two, if you also are in a very highly paid geographic area, that means you're also going to be paying perhaps much higher for an employee. So there's a lot of complexity with that, and I think those are a couple problems that are going to be really interesting when it comes to hiring and onboarding. And I think there's some really great startup founders working on problems in that space.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, remote is one. Then there's another one called Let's Team from Alex. Then Boundless. There's actually a bunch of other companies working on these problems, and these are very, very difficult and very important problems. Very important problem to solve as well. I mean, and we have seen this ourselves, and we have seen this ourselves at Indies, So, I mean, we've hired people in the Valley, and we're paying like 160, 180K per year as a salary. And we had a better engineer in Estonia, and we were paying like 50 grand for a year. So, the difference was like clearly visible, and it was so big. So, definitely the organization will have to explore remote work, and they'll have to leverage this like cost arbitrage. This brings me to the next question. So, office is a fun place to be at, you make friends at office, you go out for beers, you enjoy with them. So how will we replicate those awesome things about office in a digital setup? I mean, how do you see that coming along?
Yeah, I think it's very important to get right, and I see a lot of interesting things happening, which are very good. I've talked to a lot of founders who are running very large remote teams, which are taking a very structured, methodical approach to how they think about culture building. Like they'll have, Slack channels where everybody posts a picture of themselves doing some task for the day. It could be like posting themselves doing a workout for the day, or they'll have structured virtual hours, right? Or basically on Thursday at 6 p.m., everybody gets inside of a Zoom and they'll all hang out. These things are excellent, right? I think we need to keep doing a ton more of those. And then, once this COVID crisis lets up, making a diligent process and investing in everybody meeting up in the same place to do something fun. There's of course, there should be some overlap in terms of, but just maybe quarterly planning and stuff that goes along with events like that. But a significant amount of time should be just invested in people hanging out together, getting to know each other in a personal way. So those are the sort of structured times where people are scheduling things to meet. But the reality of working together as a team is that in order to truly feel a bond with them, most of the reason why offices are just fun places to be is that, you're working together in the same place.
Yep.
Serendipitous conversations and chats together. So I think it's going to be very mindful. And, of course, I'm biased here because this is the part of the product and problem that I'm trying to solve. is it's like, how do you replicate just the minimal set of interactions where people can serendipitously exchange conversations? And I think part of that too is how do you kind of blend the lines between work and play? And I think, Slack did this very well, right? When Slack came out, everybody didn't really understand from a business perspective why it mattered, but all the engineers loved it, right? All the salespeople loved it because it was just fun to chat inside of it, right? I think we're going to see many more tools oriented around like, how do you enable independent contributors and every part of the stack of a company to have more fun. And I think the things that we're doing in Pragly, the things that I'm seeing with I think I've seen other tools which are more designed around just like, company building in general, culture building in general. Like I think I've even seen people using Jackbox.tv. I don't know if you've heard of that, but like,
no. Okay.
Yeah, so basically it's a way to play online games with your friends. But I've even seen that inside of company settings. So I think this real thought process and investment towards fun activities that are kind of interlaced with actual work is really where you can start to quote unquote replace the office, or the sort of best parts of the office that people really care about.
That's awesome. So, I mean, is there any particular any thoughtful approach, like a framework that you have seen that founders use in order to build a good culture? I mean, I see this is an awesome opportunity because this is like a white field. Like you can build your culture the way you want, and you can literally like shape it as per your willingness. So, have you seen any particular framework around culture building, or any particular way to build culture?
Right. Yeah. In terms of a framework, it's a bit challenging, right? I think, I mean, personally, from what I've seen, I think, GitLab probably has everything sort of systematized and codified in their remote handbook, as they always do. And I'm sure it has some great insights there. But I think realistically, you have to sort of feel out like, what are the demographics of people that are inside of your company? And, if for example, they're really, you have a bunch of board game lovers inside of your team. You're finding a structured time to like set aside for playing board games together, or like instead of Pragly, we have a particular room / channel where you can just play trivia with other people, and like people can see other people playing trivia and jump. I don't think there's a silver bullet. I mean, I think the general framework is just understanding the sort of demographics of people inside of your company, and then making sure that you make a mindful effort to just doing it on a repeated basis. I think where people really start to degrade in their culture is they don't value it enough. This idea of hanging out together. So and I see time and time again that people do want like a one-off happy hour, and they say, "Oh, this is awesome! I got to know my teammates on such an excellent basis." And then, 2 months goes by and there's not another happy hour. And I think then it starts to degrade, right? I think consistency is key. If there's one framework that you can really gravitate towards, it's just making sure that you do it over and over and over again. I think that's the most important on a week-to-week basis.
That's awesome. I mean, this is very interesting. Like when you brought it up, I mean, like culture building is very organic in offices, right? I mean, like you just like put a foosball, or you put a pool table, and people will start and they'll come play, and they'll have conversations, and something will start from there. But in a remote setup, like you have to take very active steps towards it, and those steps are very important in order to shape that culture. So. I mean, and Pragly is a great tool to enable those culture building things. Like for example, like we have a few channels in Pragly where we'll just like these are called chill channels. So you'll just like join them and you just come and chill. So and you, I mean, as simple as that. So, I mean, that really helps bring organic conversations out, and like build better relationship with other humans. I mean, in fact, this brings me to my next question. So, I mean. The biggest challenge that I see coming along with remote work is a loss of humanity touch. Let's say when you are like miles away from your coworkers, I mean, over the course of time, they start becoming a Slack channel, a Slack handle for you. like, I mean, they're just like a Slack handle. I mean, you don't even understand that there's a human behind it. So how uh, how do you how should we make remote work more human? Like more biased towards people first.
Right. Yeah, I think the biggest thing that Doug and I noticed when working remotely is that a lot of the conversations which traditionally happen inside of an office, inside of audio and video, are being relegated to chat. And I think you really nailed
Hmm.
it on the head with that comment about, how do I not treat this person as just like a Slack handle, right? That where I'm just sending them information. I think there needs to be more of a culture of escalating to audio video when it matters. And I think everybody's been in this situation where like they say, hey, Nidesh, do you have a second to chat about something? And you say, oh yeah, what do you want to chat about? And then they with another thing, and then it ends up with this sort of tit for tat back and forth,
Yeah.
just to resolve a question that should have taken 2 minutes over audio video, but that's getting resolved in sort of 15 to 30 minutes.
Yeah.
One, that points out a productivity issue, right? Like, how do you just resolve these questions faster? That's the first point. But the second point is that, there's a beautiful time to just like hash things out very quickly and get to some sort of resolution, right? Instead, what you've done is like, you've had this frustrating back and forth conversation where it took way longer than it should have to resolve something. And there's perhaps like tensions are starting to flare up as a result of that, right? Like of people not responding fast enough on text. So I think that, whether it is, having a bias to do, doing slash the Zoom, or whether in Pragly just to jump into a channel or a direct conversation, having that bias to audio and video, and not just audio and video, but like having a bias to turning on your video. I know, although I couldn't figure out turning out video in this webinar format, normally I have video on. But having a bias towards video is always good, because
Yeah.
the devil's in the details with how people are reacting to things. I think everybody's been in this situation where you have some requests and somebody's like uncomfortable with it because they have so much work, they don't want to pile on another task, and it's those important details are masked behind audio only, like if you just have audio. So I think part of the humanity is just introducing way more audio and video, and always biasing to having video on. Sure.
Yeah.
Simple as that. I think that'll get a lot of the way there.
That's so true. Awesome. I also think like very interesting things coming up along this side. So essentially, like companies ask their employees to essentially post their family pictures. Like what did they do with their family this week, and like where did they take their kids out, or what did they eat? Like all such things. So this sort of like creates a way
Right.
to give you an insight about someone's personal life, and to open that app and to be vulnerable kind of like makes you be human. So those are like
Right.
some of the very interesting things that I have seen as well. But I mean, very interesting thoughts on the audio and video context, and I never thought of it this way. But this makes so much sense now. So really amazing stuff there. This brings me to my next question. So I mean, we have seen that digital tools are sort of like doing most of the heavy lifting for remote work. We never thought that we'll move to remote work this like at this pace. Um, Thanks to Zoom, thanks to Slack, thanks to Plagly, and thanks to all the tools which enable remote work and which make it so easy. I mean, if this would have been happened, like this would have happened, let's say 5-6 years back, we would have been in a very bad shape. I mean, like the entire work would have been like stopped. But thanks to Zoom, we're still working and we're still like rocking. So, so I mean, I'm very curious to know about your thoughts on like how do you see digital tools evolving and solving more remote problems? Like what are the major gaps that you see in the market that would come in and that will be filled up by digital tools?
Yeah. I think I kind of addressed the sort of somewhat the gaps right now, like with respect to the primitives, right? We have the primitives of Slack. How do you send a text message? You can do that, and it's fine, right? There's you don't lose data along the way. And similarly with
Yeah,
Zoom, it's pretty good. It works
yeah,
pretty well, and once you're inside of the conversation, right? But
yeah,
when you spin up a Zoom meeting, Zoom was designed to WebEx because WebEx
Mm.
sucked. Eric Yuan was like,
Mm.
I'm doing all these sales meetings,
Yeah.
and audio's cutting out all the time. A couple of people can't join because WebEx sucks.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to make a better WebEx that's just going to kill it for sort of sales and external presentations and all that. It's going to be
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing now is that that just because you have video that works does not mean that it's the right modality for communication in all forms. And
Yeah.
I think what's interesting is that we're going to see a sort of quote unquote unbundling of Zoom where a lot of interesting niche use cases that really are very UI and UX oriented are going to spin out of video. And I think, the success that we've seen with Pragly is a result of that for remote workers, but we're also seeing tremendous interest in things like House Party, right? Not even like a sort of spontaneity and serendipity with respect to remote work, but also serendipity with respect to like just hanging out with your friends in a virtual setting. And I think everybody's been in a Zoom event or two where they're with their family, and it's just a little bit of a crazy time just because everybody's trying to talk to everybody, right? I think better mechanics of how do you sort of have side conversations or more spatial awareness about how you're talking to other people inside of larger events is going to be interesting because everybody's running their sort of events and even conferences inside of Zoom. And I think, and I've already started to see with companies like AirMeet. I think there's Hopin, for example, which has been really big recently.
Yep.
Remo, which focuses on
Remo.
virtual events.
Yeah.
Just a way to engage with other people that feels a little bit more authentic in a sort of stranger setting. So I think these are a lot of the gaps that I see with respect to video. And I think we'll only start to see that improve just because right now, what's also happening, and this is a little bit of a side note, is that there's a really, really interesting blossoming that's happening of infrastructure providers for video. So basically infrastructure as a service for video and audio. It's been a smaller space for the last few years, but it's really starting to come up just because there's a lot more video tools that just want to have turnkey solutions to plug into their unique apps to try and test out different functionality. So I think in addition to the sort of digital gaps that we're seeing, I think we're going to start to see a lot of these video conferencing providers really come to the forefront, really powering these sort of video apps and communication tools. So that's what I see in this landscape right now. I know a lot of that answer is biased towards like communication, but
awesome.
that's a lot of the digital gaps that I'm seeing.
Can you also point us towards like some async things? I mean, a lot of your comments are around sync. So how will async collaboration evolve?
Absolutely, yeah. That's a really good point, and I appreciate that because my mind always goes to sync.
For sure, yeah.
I'm obsessed with sync, but I understand the value of async. It's super, super important, right? That everybody's working remotely, but I was talking about a couple of weeks ago about the sort of 4 different classifications of remote teams, and one of them is the entirely distributed team, right? Which is like crossing global time zones. So there's like fully distributed, which is like same time zone or roughly the same time zone. Distributed where it's like crossing different time zones. In the case of the different time zones, you really don't have many options other than async, right? And I think I see a lot of interesting things happening with companies like Threads, for example, where it's basically providing internal email, which just feels more beautiful. It's really decision oriented. Like email is not very decision oriented. There's no actionable outcome from email really right now, right? It's just text this way and that, and it's threaded, which is cool, but there's no like decision making on top of that that's tracked and that leads to like project completion. So I think that's very interesting. I've seen also Friday.app. Luke from Friday.app, I think he's working on a very similar problem there, and it looks like a very beautiful tool that he's making. And I also see tools like, yak.chat as
Yeah,
well, where it's
yeah.
basically asynchronous video
Mm,
and voice. I think
mm,
that's also interesting too. I think, there's this element of communication, right? Where like, hey, you don't always want to escalate things to synchronous, right?
mm,
Like synchronous is fast for just like, hey, let's just hash this out really fast. There's going to be
yeah.
this back and forth. Let's just do this real quickly, and or if you just want to chat about like non-work stuff, that syncs great for that too. But sometimes if you just want to share information, it needs to be in a richer media than text.
Mm,
It's screen share and annotate the screen share and voice plus video is a pretty good way to do that. And I've seen that with Yak. I've seen, Loom has a
yeah,
fantastic tool for asynchronous video as well. And
yeah,
I think all of them are just growing super fast,
yeah.
and really filling those gaps. So I think things in async too. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I use Loom a lot, and it has been nowadays like my go-to tool for everything. So I mean, usually I try to avoid meetings. So let's say if I had to avoid meeting, I'll just like do a Loom recording and just like present my screen and like let some thoughts there and just like share that with people. I mean, this makes things so easy and avoids those like meeting times as well. So Loom
Right.
has really been a game changer for me personally, and I really love using them as well. Um, coming to your next question. So your thoughts on digital tools were very interesting. I mean, I haven't used Yak.chat, but I've heard a lot about them, so I'm going to use them now. Um, yeah, I mean, they seem to be like pretty popular these days. So let's see, like, what do we want there? Cool. So I mean, coming to our next question. So uh, remote work was sort of made popular by digital nomads. Like I mean, there was a tribe
Mm,
before COVID era. Like there was a tribe which used to travel throughout the world and like do work. And they were like always remote, right? And they sort of like made remote work cool, and they made it very popular as well. And there were like guys like Peter Levels and several others
right.
who made awesome startups like Nomad List, remoteok.io, too, and they made remote work very popular. I mean, after COVID-19, like, how do you see a rise in digital nomads? Uh, I mean, do you see like a rise of like, would people be working from anywhere, or would they be working from home? So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there have been a ton of surveys. I mean, there's one thing for sort of management saying, "Hey, everybody's going to be working remotely" versus independent contributors. But
Yeah.
I think from all the sort of polling, what we're seeing from ICs is that maintain flexibility. They're realizing the advantages of an office, but what I predict to happen is that once this is all over, and then for the teams that are still going to be operating inside of an office, they're gonna say, "Oh, this is great. We're gonna go back to the office," and within a couple of weeks, they're gonna realize that they were in
Yeah, it sucks.
like a 3-hour commute round trip, and then
Yeah,
that, hey, this actually wasn't that cool after all.
yeah.
They're going to realize the benefits, and the most important thing, and where everybody's going to have their leverage now, is that they have a case that's proven in fact that they were still productive, and that's
Hmm.
going to be huge. Because prior to this whole situation, when people were working remotely, or like they would take a day off to work remotely, that was kind of like their laundry day where they weren't working as
Hmm.
hard, right?
Yeah.
That sort of stigma was biasing it for the rest of the remote people. So now that everybody's been working in a remote context, everybody realizes that you can be productive, then that's going to be a game changer. Now, it's interesting what it does in terms of sort of demographic mobility. I think what at least I hypothesize inside of the U.S. market, and I'm sure there's like varying degrees of difference and similarity across the world, is that places like San Francisco, where it's so astronomically expensive, there's going to be even more migration pressure
Yep.
from the big metro areas, especially when space is going to be a lot more valued in the next couple of years than it was
Yeah.
before. I think like being claustrophobic, not only was not nice just because you didn't have enough leg room, but also the possibility of viral transmission.
Yeah.
So I think there's going to be this push outwards. So I don't know the extent to which it is going to be this like this massive wave, but I think I can even leaving the Bay Area at some point, but just because it matters less, right?
Yeah.
I think even not even with respect to sort of the team communication perspective, but just the sort of external deal making perspective, it's just not going to be as important to meet face to face. One, because people realize they can be as effective in deal making over video camera, and two, also you don't want to transmit a virus. So I think as a result of that, I think there's going to be even less reason to stay in the sort of big metro areas and have that sort of physical networking.
Yeah. I mean, and there are like few counties which are those are like doing very interesting things. For example, there's a county called Tulsa, right? So I mean, you as a remote worker, you can move there and they'll give you $10,000, which is awesome. So I mean, and I'm sure like there'll be more such things which will come up over the course of time. Maybe like they can be like a business idea around building a service.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Right. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a cutoff, but yeah, I think that's. I think there's going to be two different things. Like, I think previous areas which are really taking advantage of this, like Tulsa, remote, saying, "Hey, we want more entrepreneurship. We want more sort of economic vitality inside of our town. It's going to offer economic incentives, and also just places which are just objectively beautiful." Like places in rural Washington and all these other places are going to start to be a lot more interesting to people as places to move to. So I'm really excited to see how that all shakes out. And of course that means like people can have bigger homes, and there's a lot more economic equality, hopefully, in terms of where how it's distributed across the U.S. of course, rather than just being hyper localized into certain city areas.
Yeah, that is actually very interesting. In fact, a friend of mine, he's starting a company where he would offer like long-term work rentals. So, I mean, like, you can work vacation rentals. So, I mean, you can go there and you can stay there for 1 month and you can work there. So it's kind of a cool concept which we'll see evolve over the course of time. So, I mean, this brings me to a last set of questions. So this is something that we ask all of our speakers. What is the most human thing that you've seen while being remote? So, I mean, so given that like you have seen so many people working remotely and so many organizations leading huge teams of remote workers, what is the most human thing that you have seen while speaking to so many people?
Yeah, it's yeah, it was an interesting one. I think different examples. I think there was an inner city school that was using us, that I chatted with, or planning to use us, and just to have a more engaging way of communicating with their students. I thought that was quite interesting. Just like something a little bit, quote unquote, with a little bit more personality than Zoom. And I thought that was quite nice. Just like, how do you engage students in a better way, in a more, fun way? I think that's really important. So that's one thing that I've seen a lot of. And then I guess for myself, so my grandma just had her 75th birthday over Zoom. And what's super funny is that she knew all about gallery mode, and it's like, oh,
That's awesome.
Cool. Yourself on gallery mode. I want to see everybody. I was like, wow, man, you know about gallery mode? That's crazy.
Wow. Okay.
So that was probably when it really hit me. That's when it really hit me that, okay, wow, there's starting to be these really intense human experiences happening in a virtual context, over video conference and remote setting, and I think that's kind of beautiful. Of course, I hope to have these inside of in a physical setting again, of course, but that wasn't half bad.
Yeah, I can imagine. Wow. I mean, belated happy birthday to your grandmom, by the way.
Yep, I'll let her know.
Awesome, cool. I guess that was pretty much it. This was really awesome. So thank you so much for being here. So I mean, if any of our attendees have questions, feel free to ask that. Otherwise, we'll end the webinar. Hello. Hello. Okay.
Hey,
No questions? Okay. All right. So we'll just end the webinar. We recorded this webinar. We'll be sharing this with you all. Thank you so much for taking the time out and speaking to us. This is really awesome, Vivek. It was a pleasure having you here. And I really enjoyed this conversation. So thank you so much again.
awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for having me,
All
Nitesh,
right.
and more than happy to come back.
All right. Have a good one, man. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.